Good morning, everybody. Part of today's proceedings are going to be live streamed. Part will not be, and will be the subject of a reporting restriction order. Those who have been in the hearing room, who I hope can hear me now, I acknowledge have complied to the best of their ability and willingly with restriction orders that have been made up to now. Unfortunately, one at least of those who have received evidence on the webinar link have not complied with proper requests by the inquiry staff to remove details put up by them promptly. I regret to say that if this continues, I will have to consider whether or not our proceedings should be broadcast to those individuals by the webinar link. I do not want to have to take that step, but if I do, I will have to uphold orders made by the inquiry. Where restriction orders apply, it is imperative that they are complied with, and as always, anybody in the hearing room or who is hearing the evidence by the link should ask a member of the inquiry staff if they are in doubt. It is likely that the evidence of the witness HN1, which we are going to hear today, tomorrow and on Friday, that a small part of that evidence will have to be heard in private. The reason for that is that a request has been made by a non-state court participant, not by the police or at the instigation of the inquiry. And if that request remains in place, I will have in due course to determine whether or not the proceedings which will be heard in private should remain private. That is a matter for the future. Can the witness now be sworn, please?
Good morning, sir. I hope you can hear me. If I could ask you to stand, and I believe you're affirming today.
Yes, indeed.
Please repeat the words after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Please take your seat.
Ms. Garchester.
Thank you, sir. HN1, for the purposes of the transcript, my name is Emma Gargeter and I am the barrister who will be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can I check that you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Fine. Thank you.
I'm not going to ask you for your name because it is subject, your real name, to a restriction order. So I will refer to you throughout as HM1. Do you follow?
Yes.
HM1, do you recall making a written statement to this inquiry dated the 18th of May 2022?
Yes, I do.
A statement of 293 pages in length?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to look at and refresh your memory from that statement more recently than May of 2022?
Yes, I have.
And are you able to confirm that its contents are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I can.
Your written evidence stands before the inquiry. The purpose of today's session is to ask you some questions about certain topics within it. Do you understand?
Yes.
Can I start, please, by asking for a document to be put up on the screen, MPS 0727448. HM1, these are notes made by officers from Operation Hearn, having spoken to you in 2014. Do you recall speaking to officers from Operation Hearn in 2014?
Yes, I do.
Can we turn, please, to page 3 of this document? And do you see, can we zoom in, please, to assist the witness on the section headed Impact of Investigation? This HM1 is what the Hearn officers recorded having spoken to you, purporting to represent your account. My feelings with regards to the current status of the SDS is that the unit is considered a pariah. Its activities and successes have been besmirched by the disclosures of certain individuals to whom I have no loyalty. Did you say that to Operation Hearn?
I recall that sentiment, certainly.
And that sentiment expressed your feelings at the time, did
yes.
it?
Mm-hmm.
To what disclosures were you referring?
I think the engagement of aggrieved colleagues who has sought to go public and bring disrepute, as I saw it, on the organisation.
Do you mean individuals such as Peter Francis, who is known to this inquiry?
I do, yeah.
He served alongside you, did he not, in the SDS, joining slightly after you?
Yeah, he was there. There was an overlap, yes.
And so your feelings at the time were that the activities and successes of the unit had been besmirched by disclosures of people like Peter Francis. Is that right?
Yeah, people like Peter Francis and those keen to exploit his willingness to talk to those that were sympathetic to his views.
And it was the disclosure of information about the unit that you considered affected the unit's reputation rather than the behaviour about which he was making disclosure?
Well, there's a bit of both, but certainly the former.
By the time you said that to Operation Hearn in 2014, were you aware that it was alleged, for example, that Bob Lambert, had fathered a child whilst in his undercover deployment?
I don't recall specifically when I got to know that or became aware of the accusation, whether it was pre or post Hearn, but I certainly remember becoming aware of it and it having been known for some time.
And would you agree that that behaviour besmirched the reputation of the SDS as opposed to its disclosure into the public domain?
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Why did you not say that to Operation Hearn in 2014?
I don't remember specifically being asked about that. It was very me-centric.
You knew when you spoke to Operation Hearn in 2014 that you had yourself had a relationship undercover, didn't you?
Yes.
Did you not consider that that besmirched the reputation of the SDS?
Well, I know we're going to talk about that later, so no, is the short answer to that.
So your position in 2014 was that your relationship with Miss Fuller was not something that had a negative effect on the reputation of the SDS or was capable of having a negative effect?
It depends what people got to learn about that when they hear about what it was all about. It wasn't, in my mind, something that would ever come to public attention.
Right, can I explore that? Because as I understand what you're saying, it's the problem, as it were, the difficulty is things coming to public attention rather than the conduct itself. Do I understand you correctly?
I think there's I know we want concise answers on these things, but we're right into sort of a grey area here. I think this wasn't an explanation for what happened here, but the whole concept of the SDS operation which people signed up to as officers, but also were given that undertaking by the organisation. But it was a covert unit that would not disclose, and those engaged in it would not become known to the public or be made known to the public. And those that sort of breached that code of conduct was that first category of those that sort of caused disrepute to the organisation. In terms of my conduct itself, and I know we're going to talk about this, I don't liken it or put it alongside. For example, you mentioned Bob Lambert. I don't liken it to that in any shape or form.
Are you aware that before this inquiry, the Commissioner has accepted that the conduct of officers who carried out deceitful, intimate sexual relationships in their undercover identities was wrong?
I am aware of that, yes.
Do you agree and adopt the same position?
Well, I accept that it was wrong, but there's a lot more to it than that. I think most affairs are wrong in some shape or form, and this was never planned, considered in my wildest dreams that this was going to be part of anything that was likely to happen, could happen, and ended up as happening.
We'll come back to the detail of what happened later, but when you say most affairs are wrong, presumably you're not referring to the sort of affair that involves a police officer acting in official capacity, misleading the woman about his true identity, are you?
No, but I'm making the comparison between emotions and in grey areas where human frailties might kick in at a particular moment that lead to a course of conduct which, yes, probably was not the right thing to do. That's what I'm likening to, as I understand it, and what leads to affairs that people subsequently regret, but very rarely are they ever planned.
So it's the lack of planning that leads you to suggest that it's a grey area. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I think I'm talking about me specifically here. So yes, I concede it was wrong, but it wasn't planned, and there was an element of, I know we're going to talk about this, there's an element of everything I did was an act of deception, from the very first hello to the very last goodbye. This was a more intense, obviously, engagement, friendship, which I absolutely accept, but it wasn't planned. But there was, to the degree that it could ever be, while recognising I was deceiving everyone, I remember it feeling very real at the time.
Intense and wholly unnecessary in order to maintain your cover. Do you agree?
So I didn't do it with a view to maintaining my cover. That really wasn't what happened. I can see how it might look. The consequences, which are slightly different, if I may, of what ensued, did provide me, with a level of credibility. But that wasn't the reason, and indeed, as I said, it wasn't. There was nothing planned. It happened, and then it lasted, and then it concluded. But there was an element of reality to it as part of who I was.
But it wasn't real, was it? You were a police officer pretending to be somebody else in order to obtain intelligence on, as it's described, animal rights extremism. So it wasn't real, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, so none of it's real. A whole act of deception for everyone. None of it was real. Absolutely, that's an intellectual sort of fundamental premise of the whole unit's existence in that sense.
And when it came not just to a hello or a goodbye, but to sexual intercourse with a woman, that deception deprived her, did it not, of her agency to choose with whom she entered into a sexual or intimate relationship?
On the basis it wasn't real, yes. But I mean, I haven't spoken to her since about it. I do still maintain the deception bit aside. They were strong, genuine feelings, which I retain.
Do you or do you not agree that your conduct in deceiving Miss Fuller besmirched the SDS?
Well, I don't. Reputationally, if people aren't going to do the detail on this and listen to where I was coming from and listen possibly to how others observed what was going on, I have a problem with accepting that without further explanation in the sort of binary, yes, I accept it, because I just don't think my conduct was in any way similar, tantamount to all the other themes pertaining to other officers in this particular area.
Right. I'll come back and ask you more about that once we've explored the relationship in a bit more detail.
Sure.
Before I move on completely, can we can take that document down, please? But can we have up on the screen UCPI 037, sorry, 1 second before I go there, MPS 0749632. 0749632. And HM1, this is, it looks like a form. It was filled out by the officers who conducted a risk assessment in connection with your application for anonymity before the inquiry. Do you follow? So you would have been spoken to sometime around 2017.
Yes.
And this is part of the notes that they made. So we see there HM1 and various details redacted of your real life. Can we scroll through this document, please, until we get to section 2.17? There's a number of blank pages. Thank you. And I want to draw your attention, please, HM1, to section 2.17 of this document, where you appear to have been asked about your key associates during your undercover deployment. Do you follow?
Yes.
Do you recall being asked about key associates by the risk assessors?
Yes.
Right. And we see there Jeff Shepherd, Paul Gravett, LTD. You can consult the cipher list if you aren't familiar with who that is. Do you want to take a moment to do that?
No, I'm familiar with who that is. Thank you.
Right. So, somebody whose name we've redacted for privacy. Again, a cipher, George. Are you familiar with who that is?
Yes.
Brendan McNally. Over the page, please. Number 7, another name that we have redacted for privacy. And then number 8, Liz Fuller. The notes record that you said this about her: clever and interested in revenge. She would want him to feel the pain. And there's then a physical description and where she lived and with whom she lived. No mention there of you having had a deceitful sexual relationship with Ms. Fuller, is there?
Not on that document, no.
You didn't tell the risk assessors, did you, that you had entered into a relationship of that nature with Ms. Fuller during your deployment?
I don't remember speaking to them about it, no.
Why not?
I assumed it was, as they were in touch with the rest of the outfit, and as part of the general inquiry, that close association between me and Liz was already known about.
How would they know about it if you didn't tell them?
Well, I assume I didn't give it much thought, other than I knew that the whole sort of the whole process was speaking to everyone, had access to all the documents. There was one massive disclosure operation going on in which my known association with Liz by people, colleagues, associates, was not hidden.
So you thought you'd leave it to your fellow undercover officers or SDS managers to tell about the relationship? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't remember it being a conscious stream of thought, other than me describing this as a very close association with someone that would not be keen to find out, as with the others, that I was an undercover police officer.
Can we zoom out, please? If we look at the following 2 sections: close relationships entered into that could impact on risk, and behaviour that may be subject of criticism that could impact on risk. Those sections are blank. So you didn't offer up any information to the risk assessors about behaviour of yours that might be the subject of criticism. Is that right?
No, I saw, well, that looks right to me. I remember the whole tenure of the conversation with me as far as risk goes was the risk of disclosure and my identification and the degree to which people would be upset by it.
You said in the previous box, it's recorded that you said that Liz Fuller would be interested in revenge.
But yeah, I don't remember those exact wordings, but I side by the fact that because of the closeness of our relationship, that it wouldn't do her or me any good, and I'd imagine that she'd be very upset.
That's precisely the point, isn't it, HM1? It's the closeness of your relationship, as to use your words, that might have led, from your point of view, to a risk that Miss Fuller might want to put your real identity out there, for example, or know your real identity. They're intrinsically linked, aren't they, in your mind?
All I say is on that one, I likened the same risk and the same motivation and the same angry response. I put it at the same level for those other individuals as well who would have similar intent, motivation to do the same thing as far as the risk to me was concerned.
But your answer to me a moment ago suggested that it was the closeness of your relationship with Miss Fuller that gave you cause for concern.
And with others on that list too.
But you didn't disclose the nature of your relationship with her nonetheless?
Not the sexual relationship, no, but I made it clear we were very close.
Is that because you were seeking to disguise or keep quiet the misconduct that was reflected in that relationship, the misconduct on your part?
I didn't, in my mind, associate what I was doing with misconduct. I didn't associate that particular bit of what I was being asked about as anything as how I perceived the risk to me and what those officers needed to understand in terms of how I perceived the anger and the reaction by those individuals, which was for different reasons on more or less on the same level.
All right, so when you were asked about close relationships entered into that could impact upon risk, it didn't occur to you to mention that you had had a close, intimate and sexual relationship with Miss Fuller. Is that the essence of it?
I didn't see, for that particular conversation, that being relevant beyond the fact I'd already described a very close relationship.
Did you understand at the time that the risk assessment was being carried out that its purpose was to inform the chairman of this inquiry about whether or not to grant you anonymity?
Yes, I knew that was part of it, yes.
And did you understand that one of the factors relevant to whether or not to grant an officer anonymity was the interest, if I put it this way for now, the interest that there might be on the part of a deceived woman to know that identity, that it was relevant?
Yes. Yes, I do absolutely. I felt I'd gone far enough in declaring the closeness and the significance of the closeness of the relationship I had with not just Denise, Liz, but with others as well.
You hadn't disclosed the closeness of your relationship with Miss Fuller, though, had you?
I think in the words I use, I describe it as a very close relationship. I felt that was sufficient.
It's materially different, isn't it, to have a very close relationship in the sense of a friendship with a person from having an intimate and sexual relationship with somebody in your undercover identity. Do you accept that?
Yeah, I accept. Look, the undercover identity bit is common to it all, but there is. All I can say is, when we try to sort of imagine how we might feel, is I personally view close, non-sexual friendships as, if betrayed, something as equally damaging from anything that it has a sexual component as well.
So you didn't see it materially enhancing the risk to you? Is that, in summary, what you're suggesting?
The risk to me, no, not materially enhancing that, but the closeness of the relationship was one that I was keen to protect from any knowledge that I was an undercover police officer. That goes for her and everyone else.
Can we take that document down, please, and put up on the screen UCPI 037227? This HM1 is a narrative account written by the risk assessors, having spoken to you, an extract from it. And section 4.12 on the first page, the whole of that, please. Could we zoom in on the whole of 4.12 on the first page? So that, thank you. HM1, you'll see that is headed relationships entered into or other behaviour that could heighten the risk. And here, what is recorded by the risk assessors is that you referred to LTD as being a close friend.
Yes.
And can we look in particular at the paragraph beginning in February 2014? In February 2014, an internet article mentioned N1 in his pseudonym as having had a relationship. The matter was investigated op Vasco. In September 2014, N1 was interviewed under caution and asked directly whether he had had a sexual relationship with LTD. He replied, no comment. It was found that there was no case to answer in relation to criminal or disciplinary matters. Do you recall being interviewed under caution and asked about whether you had had a relationship, a sexual relationship with LTD?
I do, yes.
And you replied no comment to the questions asked of you, is that right?
Yes.
Did that not trigger you to consider that Operation Hearn or the various police operations being conducted were specifically interested in whether or not you had had sexual relationships undercover?
Well, I was aware that it did, but the interview under caution and that whole conversation was so LTD-centric and focused from even the introduction to what I was going to be spoken to about.
Yes, so in the interview you were asked about LTD, but my question goes a bit wider than that. So HM1, as at 2014, you were aware, weren't you, that there was interest by the police in whether or not SDS officers deployed undercover had had sexual relationships in their undercover identities?
Yes.
And you chose nonetheless not to disclose that you had had such a relationship with Miss Fuller to Operation Hearn or to the risk assessors?
So on Operation Hearn, I was only asked about LTD. Operation Hearn made it quite specific that that's what they wanted to talk about. And the rest of my SDS deployment for me was a deeply covert operation which was done with the full knowledge and transparency of those wrapped around me. And I would answer their questions specifically, and that's what I did. And that was there was nothing but LTD that focused, or there was no one else other than LTD who focused as part of the Op Hearn engagement with me.
Is the import of what you've just said that unless you were asked the direct question, you were not going to offer up any information?
Yes, I didn't trust the process. I mean, it's Operation Hearn was focused on something. I cooperated. It was not to look at the wider aspects of the whole operation, and they made that clear at the beginning.
And what about the inquiry? Do you trust the inquiry process?
Yes, and I hope. Yeah, I don't want any credit at all, but I hope I get some recognition that I've engaged with the inquiry cooperatively at every stage.
The risk assessment process was connected to the inquiry, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, it was a bit of the blur. There was so much risk assessment, op herm, the inquiry, I'd moved on, and very keen, sort of to move on from it. So I don't have a clinical distillation of who was doing what and how it all connected. As far as the inquiry goes, as I say, from day one, I would argue that I had been as cooperative as I could have been and can be.
Have you been candid throughout?
I think I have.
Can we take that document down, please, and put up on screen UCPI 037228? This HM1 is an extract from a witness statement that you signed and was submitted on your behalf to the inquiry in support of your application for anonymity in 2017. The black boxes are simply there because the bits not pertinent to this issue have been redacted in their entirety. Can we turn, please, to page 2? In paragraph 9 of your impact statement, you said this: I acted professionally and conducted myself with integrity throughout my SDS deployment. Was that candid?
In my mind, it was.
Even though you had had a deceitful sexual relationship with Miss Fuller during the course of that deployment, you considered that you nonetheless acted professionally and conducted yourself with integrity throughout your deployment?
I mean, putting it crudely, yes, but I do want people to hear more about this when we get to it, and then they can judge.
I will come to the detail to permit that judgment to be made, HM1, but at the moment I'm asking you questions on the basis that the Commissioner has acknowledged that having a deceitful sexual relationship with a woman in your undercover identity was wrong. Bearing in mind that acknowledgement, do you maintain that you acted professionally and conducted yourself with integrity throughout your undercover deployment with the SDS?
So I'm not contesting and I'm not disagreeing with that finding and that acknowledgement by the Commissioner. That was not a position by anyone of the day that made clear that this grey area was anything other than a grey area.
What was grey about it for you, HM1?
So I think there's a stage before we engaged in a sexual relationship. It remained absolutely. It hadn't even crossed my mind, Emma, that this was ever going to be part of a strategy. It didn't feature in any conversation as part of my planning and preparation. I didn't expect to see anything written down about it. It wasn't even a stream of consciousness. And it was something, everything is caveated with the fact, yes, it was an act of deception. I mean, I've deceived everyone from day one. That's the tenet of the whole operation. But I do liken it to an affair that shouldn't happen. But there was a level of intensity which for me felt real and genuine, and I shouldn't have. I know it was wrong, and is that does that condemn in perpetuity that my whole conduct and operation and reputation I had? Beyond that acknowledgement, in the circumstances in which it happened and how I thought we felt about each other, and for which I still care genuinely, even though there's this whole deception angle. I'd ask others to make that judgment, but I do distance myself from that statement from a subsequent Commissioner attempting to draw a line under conduct which I find absolutely appalling.
Do I understand then that the Commissioner's position influenced whether or not you yourself disclosed the deceitful relationship?
No, I don't even remember paying attention to that until it was delivered to me as, this is the statement, how do you feel about that? It was a discussion around how do you think you fit into that apology? because there was some. I can't remember the whole language, but some of the adjectives used, I in myself contested, because that wasn't. I didn't think they applied to me, and I still don't.
So you don't align yourself wholeheartedly with the apology issued on behalf of the Commissioner?
Oh, I do. I align myself with my own apology, but it was wrong. It was wrong. It's
so what
affairs wrong generally. This was wrong.
What do you mean? Sorry, my own apology. You said I align myself with my own apology.
Well, yeah. So I'd have used a different set of words than the Commissioner used. But my whole sort of, if you like, approach to what I was asked to do was that no one would ever find out, so no one in essence gets hurt. You can have suspicions, and it can all be inconclusive. But it was with that mindset and approach, which most of us had actually. It was an operation in which your presence would never be declared, regardless of whether people speculated subsequently that that's what you might have been.
Does it follow from that your view is that it's okay to deceive a woman into a sexual relationship so long as there's no chance of her ever finding out?
No. I'm aware that as soon as I say things like I've just said, it lends itself to that question. I absolutely do not think that there is a link between the two. I'm making a distinction between what happened that was totally unplanned, but was the wrong thing to do, but it was a product of how two individuals felt about each other.
When you say how two individuals felt about each other, Miss Fuller didn't know that the person she was entering into a sexual relationship with was a police officer, did she?
No, although there were plenty of suspicions about me, but I absolutely wasn't relying on that to assume that she didn't know. No, any more than anyone else with whom I became very close.
And so how she felt, or may have thought she felt at the time, was based on a lie, wasn't it?
It was absolutely, everything I did was based on a lie, because I was an undercover police officer. I mean, all I can offer on this one is I wasn't the liar side. I don't believe I was acting. I don't believe I was deceiving. I don't believe I was purporting to be anything other than what is 95% the person I am anyway. So take the lie out of it, which I accept poisons the whole thing. I absolutely concede that, as it does for everything I did in SDS with friendships. Everything with that taken as read, there was an element of reality to it for me. And well, I won't speak for this.
But you say in your witness statement, you acknowledge that she would not have entered into that sort of relationship with you had she known that you were a police officer. So the deception was material to her decision on whether she consented to that relationship, wasn't it?
I maintain that I wouldn't have got a hello from anyone had anyone believed beyond the suspicions that I actually was an undercover police officer. So, and you take it to that level, yes, I mean...
But you accept, don't you, that a hello is quite different from a sexual relationship?
I totally do. It was more the answer to the question, but the deception angle kicks in as soon as you are looking for that reciprocal hello.
It doesn't follow that the deception has to go as far as deceiving someone into a sexual relationship, though, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it wasn't intended to. I still think there's a grey area when it comes to that sort of nuanced interpretation, and every case is different between a sexual relationship and an intense friendship that is non-sexual.
So you think that an intense friendship that is non-sexual is comparable to a sexual relationship in terms of the effect of the deceit? Is that what you're saying?
So personally, and I'm only talking personally, not in terms of what I've done, personally, if I was betrayed by a friend in this way, that was non-sexual but was a level of intensity that exists in real life, I don't think I would make that distinction. I don't know, because it hasn't happened to me, but intense friendships for me, non-sexual, carry the same level of seriousness, and I can only imagine the same level of hurt were I to be betrayed in the same way.
Did you listen to any of the evidence of Miss Fuller that was given yesterday?
I didn't listen, no. I'm aware of what was said.
Have you had a chance to read the witness statement that she's provided to this inquiry?
Yes.
You understand, don't you, that the impact on her of finding out that she had been in a relationship with somebody who was not who he said he was has been severe?
Yes.
Much more severe than simply the impact on those with whom you were friends, somebody like Paul Gravett or Jeff Shepherd, for example.
I haven't had a conversation or seen their impact statements as to how they really feel.
Is your evidence that you didn't at any time foresee, nor upon reflection understand, that the impact upon Liz Fuller, of having had an intimate and sexual relationship with you would be greater than simply forming a close friendship with somebody?
Yes. Yes.
Do you see it now?
I do see it now, yes, absolutely. I mean, I would, yes.
And what has changed?
Sorry, go on.
What has changed that means that you see it now, but you didn't see it before?
Maybe I didn't mean I didn't see it before. I'm sorry, I might have misheard you. I beg your pardon. In terms of what would I anticipate the level of hurt to be by finding out that I was an undercover officer, it was always clear to me that the level of hurt, as it would be for me, I know that, would be deeply distressing. When you see it in written form, it enforces and brings home the suffering. But that wasn't my intent, never has been, and I regret that it's had this effect. As I say, it wasn't my intention that my presence or identification as an undercover officer would ever be made known.
I'll come back to more questions about the relationship later, HM1. Can we take that document down and ask? I'm going to ask you some questions now, please, working broadly chronologically, starting with briefly the work that you were doing before you joined the SDS and your understanding of SDS work during that period. Do you follow?
Yes.
So in your witness statement, you describe that prior to joining the SDS, you worked on C Squad on the domestic extremism desk. Is that right?
Yes.
And that covered, amongst other things, animal rights.
Yes.
You say in your witness statement that the SDS was never spoken about. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Not to newcomers anyway.
Do you mean newcomers to Special Branch?
Yes. Yeah.
And you also say that the longer you remained in Special Branch, the more it became clear that there was some sort of undercover capability. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, I do.
How specifically did it come to your attention that there was undercover capability within Special Branch?
I think there was as you became more familiar with the outfit, more trusted, had more visibility of what were then covert units, even within Special Branch, and certain terminology would get used on intelligence reports to indicate their provenance. You became aware of this covert capability, and then if you couple that with, I guess, for want of a better term, there was talent spotting that went on by either former SDS officers or the current leadership running the organisation. I guess, talent spotting potentially suitable officers that might be might be good at that work and might want to do it.
And that's what eventually happened to you, isn't it? You were approached by people connected to the SDS, Bob Lambert, I think, in particular.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So you gained some understanding that there was undercover capability. You also say in your witness statement that you gained indirectly an understanding of the value of the output of the SDS. Can you describe how you came to gain that understanding about its value, not just its existence?
Yeah, because on the desk you had access to, if you like, what was then minuting on paper files up and down the chain. And you would see sort of either the commendations by seniors within the Met or ministerial interest in the value placed and a letter of thanks. And that sort of the culture of having access to that type of correspondence.
So that's the sort of thing that you saw before you joined the SDS?
Yes, because it went part and parcel with, if you like, SDS being part of Special Branch, and it was normally subsumed, especially when it was sort of at ministerial level, a thanks and appreciation for something related to a specific event that had been valuable.
Can you remember any specific example, seeing a specific example of that before you joined the SDS, or is that a broad recollection?
It's a broad recollection, but the nature and the coverage of SDS was quite broad. So it was, even allowing for the desk I was on, which was sort of domestic, if you like, extremism. It covered what was very prevalent today, the threat from Irish Republican terrorism on the mainland, and other forms of, if you like, politically inspired violence, and the disruption or furtherance of disruption of specific events linked to that type of activity would always be the subject of correspondence from seniors and government, which the leadership of Special Branch were keen to convey to their employees.
You refer in your witness statement also to the sorts of questions that might be submitted. So, for example, what level of public disorder could be expected at an event might be a question that as a C Squad officer, you had.
Yes.
And you described that in your statement as standard tasking for the SDS.
Yes.
Did you, when you were on the C Squad, knowingly submit that sort of query for the attention of an SDS undercover officer, or did you simply submit the question not knowing who might answer it or how it might be answered?
Yeah, there was a formula for submitting it through the Detective Chief Inspector, who would then be responsible for the answers to the tasking. So it wouldn't be to named people, no, it would be into discreetly the unit, and then it wouldn't be specific.
When you refer to the Detective Chief Inspector in the unit, you mean the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS, is that right?
Yes, it would go through, if you really want the hierarchy, the Detective Chief Inspector outside of SDS. So these were the sort of the big chiefs of the central squads who owned, if you like, the relationship with this covert unit. He would minute the file, the tasking, to the Detective Chief Inspector in charge of the SDS, and the tasking would be responded to and fed back to the desk in the same way, but in reverse.
And as the desk officer submitting that query, would you have directed it for the attention of the SDS, or was that for the DCI, the big cheese, as you refer to decide, I'll send this to the SDS?
It was a bit of both, but it was a sort of automated process, knowing that would be where quite often the most valuable insight into the mood, the size, the opposition, what was being planned. The SDS held the most accurate, if you like, up-to-date information on what that was likely to be. And the customer ultimately for this was the uniformed police divisions that were linking our assessment to the degree to which they would need to police and prevent disorder and protect whatever the subject of the demonstration was. I think most people, I hope this is relevant if you don't mind, I think the days, anyone sort of born post-2000 will have no conception of, we've lost almost the ability now to demonstrate properly, if you like, in old-fashioned terms. Large-scale demonstrations and bringing London to a halt, and the sort of the political activism on the streets is very much a product of that period, which for anyone sort of, I say, born in the last 20 years, can have no sort of comprehension or understanding of. And it seems a bit odd when we talk about this, but the value of the intelligence on insights into the level of public disorder, especially for the really big events, that was where we got sort of, I guess, most of our, across the unit, not specifically what I was doing, most of our kudos and value, because it linked to police resourcing and prevention of disorder, which otherwise would have been in some cases quite catastrophic.
That was an answer about the SDS, the value of the SDS.
Yes.
Am I understanding that correctly?
You are, but SDS for policing nationally was part of Special Branch. So the customer, if you like, would not differentiate. The customer would look to Special Branch and its remit for this work. Within Special Branch, the SDS specifically was the unit that was able to give, if you like, the most prescient and up-to-date information on mood and numbers and the nature of the opposition.
So just focusing back on where I started, the level of knowledge that you had as a C Squad officer of the SDS and what it was doing, what was your level of knowledge?
Well, it became more incrementally by the day, as I was identified as maybe being someone that could do this work, then encouraged to speak to others, others encouraged to speak to me about more insight into what it was all about. And so incrementally, as I say, I was sort of building discreetly knowledge of the capability, the value, the way of living, the way of working.
To what extent did your work on C Squad inform you regarding Special Branch's interest in the animal rights movement and animal rights activism?
It was deeply embedded. So the whole sort of domestic extremist agenda and the overlap with the extreme elements of the animal rights movement was all part of that particular part of what Special Branch did on, as you say, C Squad.
Did you learn about, for example, whether there were particular individuals that Special Branch was interested in, or types of activism within the animal rights movement?
As time went on, yes, it was very, within policing, it was all very public. This was an era of very prevalent campaigns, arson campaigns, which, new headline-grabbing stuff. So it was out there in the sort of, if you like, the public narrative. There was considerable resource outside of SDS, nationally, looking at this, the threat posed by the extremist elements of that particular movement, and the efforts ongoing to sort of thwart that particular element of it. And so it was headline grabbing, daily, if you like, requirements. Such was the sort of nature of how prevalent that type of activity was.
What I'm trying to understand is whether your work on C Squad, so not your exposure to what was in the public domain, but your work on C Squad, meant that you had an understanding, for example, of particular individuals who were deemed to be of interest to Special Branch, or particular groups.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So before you started your deployment as an SDS officer, you had you some understanding of what Special Branch was interested in the animal rights field?
Very much so, yes.
The animal rights movement, I think you acknowledge in your witness statement, contained a swathe of legitimate and lawful campaigners and campaigning, did it not?
Yeah, the vast majority.
To what extent was it considered when you eventually deployed as an undercover officer that you would inevitably come into contact with people carrying out wholly legitimate and lawful campaigning in the name of animal rights?
Absolutely understood, believed, accepted, and realised.
To what extent did you receive any guidance about the question of proportionality with regard to reporting on such individuals? So was it deemed proportionate to report on people carrying out lawful and legitimate campaigning activities?
The proportionality was all about the efforts required to get through and be able to identify those engaged in activity that was certainly not in any way lawful and was associated with acts of violence, arson and planning and intimidation and economic damage. Now, these people were deeply hidden, obviously, and there was a vast grey swathe of legitimacy on the left-hand side, but as you progressed across that sort of Venn diagram, a morphing and a changing sometimes of allegiances from extremism into more moderate, and then and the opposite as well. So yes, an acceptance that there was a need to be present within a movement that was largely engaged in lawful activity, but there was that grey area which I needed to get to as quickly as possible, for your question on proportionality, with the minimum of incursion on others' private lives. And so why was I chosen to do this? All I can answer is, in many of my colleagues, I saw the same. And I know we don't like this term professionalism because we'll come back to that sort of challenge on it, but there's a level of integrity, conduct, behaviour, while having a job to do and a tightly defined requirement, and being asked to do it and recognised for it, a need to make those judgment calls on proportionality while operating in that grey area, but ultimately an area in which you were alone, and it was those judgment calls you had to make and defend them.
I'll come back to the question of selection of officers and professionalism and integrity, but my question was really aimed at whether or not there was any guidance, any line, any rule on whether or not it was proportionate to have an undercover officer reporting on those who were engaged in entirely lawful and legitimate campaigning.
So I think the reporting would only be, to my mind, related to individuals that were associated in some way with those that, if those individuals themselves weren't engaged in criminal activity, they were associating themselves with individuals that the state needed to know more about as an intelligence target.
Right, so individuals who were not themselves engaged in anything other than lawful and legitimate activity might find themselves reported on by virtue of their association with individuals involved in unlawful or potentially unlawful activity. Is that right?
They often wouldn't know. It would only be by association of the types of events that they turned up at, which gave an indication that these people might be involved in something that was anything other than law-abiding. Now, I can remember just as often providing an assessment that these individuals were absolutely not part of any extremist agenda and were not of interest, and that colleagues found as helpful as the opposite. Yes, they are associating themselves, they have changed their demeanour, their mood has changed, and they're surrounding themselves, or they're making themselves, trying to get closer to those that were certainly engaged in unlawful activity. So it's a spectrum, but there was as much sort of, if you like, intelligence, certainly from my end, going and saying that absolutely of no interest whatsoever, and unless that changed, that was as helpful as the opposite.
So on that approach, therefore, it is quite possible that as an undercover officer deployed into the animal rights field, you would be submitting reports on individuals who were doing nothing but lawful and legitimate campaigning. Simply to record that.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I interrupted, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, simply to record that they were engaged in lawful and legitimate campaigning.
That type of report would normally be specifically in response to someone I was being asked about. I wasn't proactively reporting on those that were, if you like, benign, for want of a better term. It's a clumsy word, I know. It's normally in response to what do you know about this person, and in many cases it was not of interest.
But you accept, therefore, that amongst your reporting were swept up people who were of no interest to the police, no legitimate interest. That was part and parcel of the deployment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I move on to ask you some questions? You've mentioned it in passing, but to how you came to be recruited and selected for the SDS. In your witness statement, you describe being approached by other special branch officers, including Robert Lambert, and another former undercover officer who I'm not going to refer to by name or by a cipher, who was already known to you. You described that person as having been something of a mentor to me.
Yes.
And having a number of conversations with those two individuals and with members of the SDS itself about what the role would involve and its challenges. It's paragraphs 9 and 10 of your statement for those following. So
yes.
Do you remember saying that?
I do.
And what you said in your statement was that you couldn't remember exactly, but you expect that you had conversations with the managers in the unit at the time. That's Detective Inspector HN 67 and Detective Chief Inspector HN 86.
Yes.
You've seen the cipher list to understand
yes, I have,
to whom I'm referring.
Yeah.
And having had all of those conversations, I want to ask you what you were given to understand about certain aspects of the role. So, for example, did anybody discuss with you how long the deployment would likely last?
Yes. So all of that, it was billed as a minimum of 3 years. Was the successful model that was relied upon. Could be longer, and it was made clear. I mean, certain things were made very clear as to the very secret nature of it, the loneliness of it, but the reliance on very tight controls, governance, protections. But it was ultimately a lonely job and wouldn't suit most. But the product of the unit collectively over the years was rendered Special Branch itself, really quite a valuable, potent outfit. And if that was the type of work that I might be interested in, come and chat further. We think you would be good at it. That type of conversation.
The tight controls, governance and protection that you've just referred to, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it was as soon as you had been selected, you then began the disappearance from all police, mainstream engagement, connection with police buildings. You began that, if you like, that sort of cultural shift to a non-police world and no connection with the police world.
All right, sorry to interrupt. You mean, therefore, controls in terms of creating an undercover or the ability to be an undercover officer rather than controls on your behaviour once you were undercover?
Oh yes, okay. I specifically meant yes the former in this particular part of the conversation. Yeah. So the whole infrastructure was covert, and it was that was made very clear as to the importance placed on secrecy, protection of identities, and the likes.
In terms of the challenges of the role that you discussed prior to joining the unit, in your witness statement you refer to discussion about the work being difficult and dangerous, that there would be challenges for you and on your family life, and that you would see your ordinary life disappear. It's paragraph 11 of your witness statement. Firstly, be careful with names, but with whom did you discuss the challenges of the undercover role? I'll ask you by individual. Did you discuss them with HN67 and HN86, the managers in the SDS, before you joined the unit?
Yes.
Did you discuss them with Robert Lambert, who had approached you? And did you discuss them with the other officer, for whom I will not give a name or cipher, who you described as having been something of a mentor to you? Did you discuss the challenges with that officer?
Yes.
So a selection of managers and former undercover officers.
Correct.
Did you have access to currently serving SDS officers before you joined the unit, with whom you discussed the challenges of the role?
Yes.
Before you joined the SDS?
Before I joined, yes, selectively, yeah.
And how did you access those individuals, if I can put it that way, because they were then in a covert unit that you didn't know entirely what it was about or who was involved, presumably?
For those particular ones, this was once I'd been, if you like, selected, and I was allowed to go and visit one of the safe houses.
Right, so that was after you'd actually been selected for the SDS?
After I'd been selected, but before I'd sort of, made any sort of serious inroads into the beginning of the process.
Right. And those were officers then serving undercover, is that right?
Correct.
Again, we'll have to be a little careful in terms of names, and I'll come back to this, but did those officers include, for example, John Dines?
Yes.
Andrew Coles?
Not at that stage.
Did you ever speak, please consult the cipher list, to the officer HN87, who deployed also into the animal rights field, but before you? Did you speak to officers who were not deployed into the animal rights field?
Yes, most certainly.
Can I ask you, you've got a cipher list there, but please take care. The individuals on your cipher list who have any red colouring on your cipher list, please don't mention any of those names. Right? But you can use, there is a number down the left-hand side that you can use so that we can understand to whom you're referring. So on the column number, which officers other than Andrew Coles, who I've asked you about, John Dines, who I've asked you about, did you speak to using that number, please?
Okay, 53.
Anybody else?
48.
All right, just pause there, please, because I can say that that is HN90.
Yes. Just going down the list.
You can stop at the end of page 2 because you won't find any undercover officers on the third page.
Okay.
All right, so HN90 and one other officer who I won't mention. You spoke to those individuals in addition to John Dines between being selected and recruited for the SDS?
Yes.
And you spoke to them, did you, about the challenges that you were likely to face as an undercover officer?
Challenges, preparation, nature of the day-to-day life. They all had a different take on it. So the conversation going in one of another directions. It was what it took to succeed, or how they'd approach the whole, if you like, gaining and securing credibility, impact on wider life, standard questions. And the biggest bit really, though, was about that entry on that day one entry as to how colleagues had gone about not prepping their legends so much, but making the plunge on that first day, and how they'd sought to approach that stylistically, culturally, and it's the lifestyle related approach to this work, which everyone had a different view on, by the way.
So no single, as it were, guiding piece of advice, but rather a collection of individual views based on personal experience.
Yeah, and I think it reflected a different type of, if you like, personalities. The common thread, though, was one of care and patience, and sort of being largely invisible and not being spoken about too early on.
You say in your witness statement that you were given advice to separate your personal life from your undercover persona. Was that advice given to you by undercover officers, former or serving, by the management, a combination of those?
Yeah, it was it was all of them, but I think, well, I know what they were all referring to there was the actual, if you like, the tangible links. So those that would, I guess, compromise the link between those two lives, as opposed to being radically different in sort of outlook, views, voice, accent. It was more the keep those clinically separate from the sort of integrity of those two lives perspective.
You also say that in your witness statement, paragraph 11, that you were advised to have anchors in the real world and that managers were keen to know that you were in a stable relationship. Do you recall referring to that?
Yeah, I do, and that was one of the requirements, actually. Yeah.
So you understood that you were required to be in a relationship?
Yeah, so that was, there would be odd examples of where people weren't, but the case would really have to be made. But the stable relationship was all about that sort of somewhere to go in what is otherwise, a very lonely way of operating.
Is that all that it was about, or was it also about trying to ensure that officers didn't enter into sexual relationships whilst they were deployed?
So that aspect of it just never came up. It wasn't of interest to me. It wasn't. It just was so. It was so not spoken about. But I can, and I believe in this. By the way, if I'd been a manager, I would have insisted on a stable anchor. Doesn't matter what it is. A stable anchor is normally the conventional relationship, and trusted and secure one, in which these two lives could come together. In a very trusting way. Absent that, it clearly didn't work for some as well as it could have been had that infrastructure been in place.
If the importance of the relationship was simply to have a stable home, somebody to come home to, it would have sufficed, wouldn't it, if you were, for example, living with a sibling or a parent. But the managers were interested in whether or not you had a relationship of the type of a marriage, whether formally or informally.
Yeah, I think it was the sibling bit, not quite the same, or a parent. This is more, do you have a trusted, reliable friend, partner that's up for this journey with you? Because by heavens, you're going to need that.
And your evidence is that at no point was even the risk of entering into a sexual relationship contemplated before you deployed.
By me?
By you or anybody in conversation or communication with you?
No, absolutely. No, never came up. But for me, it wasn't even being, what if this happens? It was just so not there.
Looking back, do you think it would have been helpful if that's something that had been actively considered?
As in specifically prescribed?
Prescribed or just some guidance given to you, for example, whether or not it was deemed permissible or not?
Yeah, well, if the is it permissible? No, it's not. It's prescribed. Is that by definition would have led to a different outcome, I guess, in terms of what happened, because it would have been something that maybe who can say? Sorry, go on. I beg your pardon.
Are you saying that if at some point before you deployed, during this period, it had been made clear to you that entering into a sexual relationship was forbidden, and that it would have made a difference to how you conducted yourself in regard to Ms. Fuller? So,
I think the answer to that has to be yes, but I don't know. I just because that is not what happened. I would think if it's actually prescribed, which would have been a very unusual thing to commit to paper in terms of, how most legislation in terms of what states are allowed to do have an element of leeway for proportionality and necessity, but doesn't specifically prescribe. And certainly at this time, that was the culture of intelligence gathering. It was all about proportionality and necessity. But your question, would it have made a difference had it been specifically prescribed? I can't imagine I would have breached that if it had been specific.
What about putting to one side prescription? What about if one of your managers had said to you, look now, we do not recommend that at any time you enter into a sexual relationship with a woman during your undercover deployment? Would that have put you off?
I think it probably would have done, but it didn't happen, so I don't know, and I really can't say, because when we get to the sort of for what happened bit, can't say, but it would have had a bearing. Certainly, it would have been a break.
A break, as in a BRAKE, just looking at the transcript.
Yeah, no, sort of. Yeah, in fact, if this is specific, look, you've made it clear this is not to happen. I just don't know, because it didn't happen that way, and all I can say what did, based on absence of any of that, and this. Well, sorry, I'm repeating myself now. The sort of this grey area of judgment calls, but what we're talking about here, is about as far from any conception I had that this might ever happen, being present at that time.
So, do I understand from that when, this is a rather cold way of saying it, and I apologise, but when the opportunity for a relationship presented itself to you, I'm just going to use that formulation for now before we come to the detail, you considered whether or not you should go ahead and enter a relationship to be a grey area?
Okay, so your words, sort of the crudeness of the question is, the crudeness of the answer is, I didn't think about it in those terms. I didn't think about whether it was permissible. I knew it was a grey area. It was, I mean, I'm not making light of this. If you're reading an Ed O'Brien novel, it's just stepped off the cliff and were sort of falling, if you like, the point of no return. It was a moment like that, as opposed to any articulation or formulation or calculation or consultation as to whether this was permissible or not.
But when I'm trying to understand HN1, when you give evidence and say it was a grey area, what do you mean?
Oh, well, there was nothing precluding, advising against this type of activity. It was, these were judgment calls, and if there had been, there would have been ample opportunity. I'm not, this is my own judgment call. I'm not obfuscating this one. By definition, I'm not. This is very personal. But whatever others have said, this was absolutely not being done outside of and without the knowledge of others. There would have been plenty of opportunity to advise otherwise.
I'm just pausing HM1. I know we started somewhat late. I don't know whether the intention is that we take a break. I'm being told 12:15. Right, I'll carry on to the next topic.
May I just inquire of the shorthand writer whether a break is now needed?
We're being told 12:15. So
12:15, yes. Before you go on, could I just ask that the transcript is corrected? As I've been reading it, the word proscribed has come out as prescribed. What the witness was saying was that it was not proscribed, not that it was not prescribed.
Thank you. HM1, at the time that you were selected for the SDS, you were in fact in a stable relationship, weren't you?
Yes.
And you describe in your witness statement that one of the managers spoke to your partner at your home address.
Yes.
Do you remember saying that? It's paragraph 14 of your witness statement, if you need to follow or anyone else is following.
I do recall that, yeah.
That happened once you were already in the back office, you say in your witness statement. Is that right?
Yes.
So in a sense, by the time your partner was spoken to, it was already too late for a decision to be taken that you wouldn't join the SDS.
I think when you're in the back office, anything can happen, and did to some. So it was the back office is quite a long, drawn out process. It could easily have been reversed.
And do you think if your partner had expressed concerns following that meeting with your managers, you would have been offered the opportunity to pull out and decide you didn't want to go ahead with the undercover deployment?
Yeah, I think I'd have probably known that prior to any conversation between my partner and the manager.
I think you say in your statement that you had already spoken to her about the sort of work that you were going to enter into before your managers did. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there's absolute expectation that one would have done.
When you say absolute expectation, was that communicated to you that you should do it, or was it a decision you took yourself to speak to her?
No, it's part of the ongoing engagement with who can I tell, who can I consult, and at what point do I formally start talking about this.
But did anybody in the management of the SDS say to you explicitly, you should make sure that your partner understands what this involves and that she's content that you should go ahead?
Yes, it was part of it. Yes, absolutely. It was be as explicit as possible on the things that are going to be sort of radically different were this deployment to go ahead.
And when you spoke to her, were you candid and explicit about what you were expecting the role to involve?
Yes, as far as I understood it, yeah.
And as far as you understood it, what sort of things did you understand? Is it the things we've already discussed, the impact on your personal life, the length of the deployment, things of that nature?
Yeah, the biggest one of all was the length of time away. Continuously.
Do you mean week to week, a month to month? The
Yes.
length of time away?
Yeah.
So she would be left without access to you for fairly lengthy periods of time, potentially?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember how she responded upon being told about what the work would involve? Was she broadly supportive?
No, I think more than broadly, very sympathetic to my sort of love of my profession. She had her own busy profession as well, so was fully occupied with that, but was more just supportive of sort of the commitment and interest and, if you like, professional love of the career I'd chosen.
Did you at any point discuss with her explicitly the fact that you would deploy as, in your undercover identity, a single man?
Yes.
And what did you discuss in connection with that, if anything?
So nothing specifically, not least because that is exactly what I was doing. and I didn't really know anything about, how things would transpire. But I did talk about the whole premise of the operation was on building friendships and investing in time patiently, being a different person for probably a far bigger part of my life than I was my real persona.
Any discussion with her about the risk that you might enter into a relationship with another woman in your undercover identity?
No.
Any concern expressed by her about that as a risk?
If it was, didn't mention it.
The meeting at which your managers spoke to your partner, were you present when that happened?
Yes.
The meeting, you mentioned in your statement things like them providing her with emergency contact numbers so that she'd know who to contact. Was everything discussed of that sort of practical nature, or was there anything more pastoral discussed?
Yeah, the more pastoral elements were sort of the regular coming together of the squad and their respective partners at least once a year, but also should they be required, more regular visits. But it was more that we are available 24 hours a day. Don't hesitate to call. And then the other bit of the sort of pastoral care was for those that wanted it or needed it or suggested they took it was, if you like, a mentor or an introduction to the partner of another serving officer. And people develop those friendships naturally anyway through the social events, but it was that type of package or discussion rather.
So can I just understand, was an offer made explicitly to your partner that she could be put in contact with the partner or partners of other serving undercover officers for support?
It was mentioned as something that was there. Didn't suit everyone, but it was in recognition of it not suiting everyone. That was something, and at the coming together at the sort of the annual sort of where we all met, those natural pairings or groupings would formulate anyway.
I think you refer in your statement to there being a sort of Christmas get together usually. Is that what?
Yes,
is
that was the annual.
Mean?
Yes.
So once a year, was it expected that you and your partner, as an undercover officer, would attend the gathering, or was it simply an invitation if you wished to take it up?
An expectation.
And was that an expectation because it was seen as part of the pastoral care that was on offer from the unit, or for some other reason?
Yeah, most people actually enjoyed it. It was a lot of effort went into organising it. It was always somewhere nice. It was an opportunity, sort of. Sometimes we'd have guests share their appreciation, but it was most people I think enjoyed the occasion. I mean, once a year, it was not too much investment from anyone.
And guests, I think you refer to, for example, more senior officers from Special Branch or outside of Special Branch might attend that gathering.
Yeah, it was more likely to be from within the Met Police. Yeah.
You say in your witness statement that you vaguely recall an interview before joining the SDS, but that it wasn't the focus of the selection process, and that by the time of the interview, the SDS had done its due diligence on you and seemed already to have decided to take you on. Can I explore with you what you mean by due diligence? Do you mean they'd spoken to your peers, to your colleagues, to try to find out information about you?
Yeah, the due diligence, I mean, by the time you come to join Special Branch, whoever you are, that the sort of the standard due diligence and the vetting's all been done. So it's more on conduct, behaviours, suitability, the way people have seen you interact with others, the quality of one's written work, the sort of interest, political curiosity that you've shown since joining. Those sorts of, I guess, those human character observations from people that had either done this work or managed the unit.
Your level of professionalism and integrity would have been of interest to them based on what you've said in your witness statement and earlier in evidence. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally fair. I mean, that was those were I think, tenets, values of special branch, the organisation as a whole. It was a time when there was quite a rigorous selection process to get into special branch from mainstream policing, which tested these, or certainly looked for these types of values and behaviours.
But in terms of whether or not you had demonstrated those values or behaviours, or were likely to continue to demonstrate them in an undercover role, the management appeared to be relying, is this fair, on soundings, on the opinions of those who had worked with you in special branch, rather than the interview process itself?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. As part of that was a big part of the jigsaw. Those observations.
So quite a lot of subjective opinion from those already in special branch with you, as opposed to any form of objective testing or analysis.
Correct. Yeah. From people on whose judgments had been relied upon for other things. So.
And in your case, one of those people is likely to have been Robert Lambert. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, that's a fair
assumption. Given that he approached you.
Yeah.
You say in your witness statement that you didn't require much persuasion to join the SDS when you were approached. And your words, paragraph 12 of your statement, that SDS was an elite squad within special branch, and that there was a sense of prestige linked to the immense importance of the public service it provided. When you say the public service it provided, do you mean what you've already given evidence about, its contribution in terms of intelligence and analysis in connection with public disorder, public order issues?
Public order, acts of violent extremism, terrorism, prevention of serious attacks, disorder, economic damage. Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And why was that? Why was it so prestigious in your view?
I think it was, well, in my view, and I say the work really wasn't for everyone. It was for very few, actually, even those that wanted to. It was deemed to be at the very heart of covert policing, with work conducted by police officers themselves, as opposed to the use of agents, informants, and technical surveillance. It was, if you got this right, the value placed on it, if you could get the right people to do it, it was deemed to be the bit of special branch and policing in general that had access to the most valuable intelligence, on which a huge bounty was placed, if you like, politically, on the value derived from this unit. And for those that thought they would be good at it, that was me. The others will judge that. I wanted to be a part of it.
Would it be fair to say that there was a sense that the SDS itself was a unit sort of somewhat apart from the rest of Special Branch, to an extent?
So it sat structurally, administratively, even legislatively, within the remit of Special Branch. But absolutely, there was that for covert purposes more than any, that sort of, we don't speak about it. It's hidden, it's not part of any main building, you won't be able to get hold of it. So yes, in that sense, it was a unit within a unit within a unit, but with its own sort of ecosystem.
And do you think that gave rise to a risk that once in the unit, individuals associated with it perhaps regarded themselves as not necessarily bound by the same rules or norms as a regular police officer might consider themselves bound by?
No, that wasn't my view at all. From colleagues I met, in the vast majority of cases, it was the anchor and the loyalty was to the organisation, and therefore, all of the same sets of rules. But everyone else needed to abide by. What there was, and this was factually true, a recognition that as soon as we start talking about mainstream policing, however hard that is, whether in uniform or some of the other undercover units, this was so radically different, with its own unique set of challenges and danger and sort of, if like, intrusions into one's own private life through the sacrifice made. It didn't really have much time culturally for anyone that equated that level of operation to the stresses and the strains of the wider policing organisation. But in terms of abiding by the same structure and being on the same payroll, absolutely a total understanding that we were part of that bigger organisation.
But nonetheless, as you say, you considered yourselves radically different, even from other aspects of undercover policing.
Yeah, and we were.
When you say in your witness statement and your evidence today that you felt yourself suited to the role, why did you consider yourself suited to the role?
I was politically curious. I was believed in the work of the police. I believed in the work of Special Branch. I believed I was good at building relationships. I believed I would be able to conduct myself correctly, notwithstanding the huge pressures and challenges of so doing. And I just thought I had a sort of inner quirky ability to do this job well.
And did that come from anything that anybody else had said to you along the way during the selection process, or was that a view that you formed by yourself?
Well, I had that view on my own, but it was what others observed too as my suitability for it, or for the role.
And did those others include Robert Lambert?
Yes.
Right, thank you. I'm about to move to a slightly different topic, and it's just after 12:15.
We'll rise now until 12:30. I hope that's long enough, and then resume.
Thank you.
So I'm just noting the Category H team are not in the room. If you want to wait for them, I will wait, and if not, I will carry on.
Let's carry on, please.
HM1, I want to move now to some questions about the time you spent in the back office before you deployed. Do you follow? So joined the SDS, preparing for deployment, building up your legend, and topics of that nature.
Yes.
We know from the documentation that you joined the SDS on the 2nd of September 1991, and I think you agree that that seems to be the right date. Is that right?
Yes.
And the documentation suggests that you deployed on the 13th of January of 1992. Again, does that accord with your recollection?
It does.
So that would have given you around about 4 months, or just in excess of 4 months, in the back office, if those dates are correct. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right, yes.
How confident are you that you didn't deploy, by which I mean didn't go out into the world in your undercover identity, before January of 1992?
Pretty confident.
Right.
Yeah.
So I asked that question so that it's clear to you because Paul Gravett has given evidence that he is confident that he saw you in attendance at the inaugural meeting of the London Boots Action Group, which was in fact in November of 1991. Is it possible that you attended that meeting before you officially deployed, with your official start date?
Yeah, it is. It is. I think Paul's right on that. It was, an opportunity to do just that, but albeit a little bit premature.
He also recalled you putting down your name on a list when a list went round of people interested, essentially, in the group, and putting that you were Matt from Salisbury. Does that ring any bells?
Yes.
And again, he recalls seeing you at a stall in December of 1991 at an event in Brixton. Does that ring any bells with you? Attending an event in Brixton in December of 1991, so again, before your official start date.
It doesn't, but I'm not denying it.
But nonetheless, the records show, as it were, an official start date for your deployment of the 13th of January 1992. But it appears then, certainly for the inaugural meeting of London Boots Action Group, that you may have gone out in your cover identity before that date. Is that a fair summary?
Yes. Yes.
You say in your witness statement that HN67, the detective inspector, and HN86, the detective chief inspector, wanted you deployed very early. That's from paragraph 72 of your witness statement. It's page 31. We can get it up if you want to refresh your memory. Just let me know if you do.
No, I do recall that. Thank you.
And did you get that impression because they said it to you explicitly that they wanted you to deploy early on after you joined the unit, or was it more implicit in the things that were being said and done?
I think it was more explicit than implicit. I think in response to possibly a sort of a landing point, sort of the London Boots Action Group, for example, but an eagerness to, get on with it as soon as possible.
And when you refer to a landing point, do you mean to say that London Boots Action Group was being set up when you were in the back office, and it seemed, in a sense, fortuitous because you could involve yourself in this new group being set up as part of your cover?
It was part of the group that I would eventually be targeted into, but it was a publicly announced campaigning group, which seemed a good opportunity to turn up at.
The relevance of it being public is that you could turn up without any suspicion?
Yes, indeed, yes.
When you deployed, you had not had you completed setting up all the aspects of your cover identity. For example, you didn't have any accommodation set up, did you?
No.
Were HN67 and HN86 aware that you hadn't completed all those steps in setting up a cover identity by the time you deployed?
Yes.
And they wanted you to deploy nonetheless?
Correct.
Did you discuss that directly with them?
I sort of trusted their judgment that I could sort of get away with it and deal with that aspect of it as part of the landing.
But there was a sense, was there, that you were being asked to get away with something, with a sort of imperfect situation?
Yeah, it was imperfect, and I remember my colleagues commenting on the not ideal start.
As you say in your witness statement, I think your words are that other undercover officers took a dim view of your premature placement when the issue came up at the Safe House meetings.
Yes.
How did it come up at meetings? Was that part of a general discussion or one-on-one discussions with you and particular officers?
I think it was part of a general conversation, sort of me being presented to the group, if you like, and got to know each other while I'd been in the back office. So more sort of general, sitting in this general sort of sitting room in a block of flats, cup of tea, and discussing, what my prep was looking like, what I'd started doing, and it was, yes, I think the lack of that sort of the accommodation aspect of it, and sort of being asked to sort that out once deployed was viewed as something I shouldn't have been asked to do.
Was that a view expressed to you by particular individuals?
It was a general feeling. No one else had sort of taken that sort of absence of their prep prior to sort of deploying on day one.
So it was seen as a deployment without adequate preparation in advance.
On that particular aspect, it was. That seems a bit unfair. Why? What's the rush? I didn't question it myself. I thought it seemed okay. Go to an estate agent and find a flat. You've got plenty of time during the day to do that sort of thing. I was eager to start. I remember that. But with hindsight, and very shortly afterwards, actually, I wish I'd listened to colleagues on that one.
Well, so at the time when they said negative things about it, you didn't really see their point of view, but you do now.
It wasn't a, for heaven's sake, don't do it. It was, what are you going to say when you're asked where you live, and because it's quite nice to be able to do that. And then the sort of general, well, nobody asks you where you live on your first meeting, other than north or south or east or west London. So it was a sort of winging of it, if you like. But it was a part of the prep which was, to my recollection and at the time, substandard.
Did you feel looking back, did you feel at the time, or do you feel looking back, that it put you at greater risk as an individual officer than if you had been given time to find cover accommodation in advance?
I felt I wasn't as sharp as I could have been intellectually in having an address to be able to quote, even if just geographically. So there was an element of obfuscation when even a straightforward question like that was asked, and thinking, why would I be like that from the outset? It was as you can see, it's something that I do remember being a bit of a nuisance, but worked through it, and then the rest, as they say, is history. Within a couple of months, I had somewhere.
The documents that you were shown when you gave your witness statement suggest that the first contract you had for a cover flat started in May of 1992. So 4 or 5 months after you started to go out into the field. Does that sound about right, that you were 4 or 5 months without a cover address?
Yes, I had. There's one address I had which my vehicles was registered to, which was checkable. But you're right. Yes, the proper address that was visitable and checkable was from May.
During that period, so from December 1991 or January 1992 until you got that cover flat, does it follow that you must have been going home to your real address, your real life home, after deploying during the day?
Yes.
Was it ever suggested to you by either HN86 or HN67 that you should take extra care in doing that because there was a TV or a film crew around making a programme about animal rights activism and there was a concern that you might be followed?
So it wasn't. There was no mention of that specific TV crew, but the generic advice and sort of drilling into everyone. I mean, I'm sure people could have got there on their own. Is that separation and good tradecraft between one sort of cover setup and your real address.
But no specific warning to take even more precautions because there was an extra risk floating about in the form of some sort of TV or film crew poking their noses in.
No, I don't remember the TV film crew advice, but to be honest, on that one, it wouldn't have added to the. You couldn't have gone any further and keep the two lives separate and adopt the highest levels of tradecraft in that aspect.
Right, so had you received that advice, it wouldn't have caused you to take different steps, for example, to seek to stay at the address of an activist that you had met in the field?
No.
You refer in your statement to ending up with the nickname Chiswick, and was that a result of, in part, the lack of a cover address and having to come up with a location to associate yourself with?
Yeah, no, it was in response to, where have you come from today, and Chiswick, and sort of a particularly sort of a character then called me Chiswick thereafter, and others adopted it.
So that was something you just made up on the spot, not something you'd planned with your managers or anything like that?
Correct. Well, I had actually come from Chiswick, so it's where one of the safe houses was generically, but hidden in a big block of flats. So it wasn't planned, no, because there was nothing to plan for other than a generic area.
Can we just have it on the screen, please? I just want to show you a record, HM1, that was found within the SDS office's records, MPS 0726991. It's your B11, sir. Thank you. And this is a record that the inquiry obtained amongst other records that appear to have been filed in the SDS office to follow HM1. And it contains your operational details, that's how it's headed. And under name, which is your cover name, it includes known as K/A, known as Chiswick, brackets in sabbing circles, close brackets.
Yes.
Was it a name that you were known by only in hunt sabbing circles?
Yes.
And does it follow from its appearance here that at some point you informed your managers that you had used that nickname with hunt saboteurs?
Yes, I mean, I would have informed, they'd have become aware. Yeah.
If you didn't inform them, how would they have become aware? What are you suggesting?
Through others. So the other line of intelligence gatherings was through informants. So other people
I'm not going to
information referring to me being present as Chiswick.
All right. So broadly, they might have seen other intelligence about someone being given the name Chiswick floating around.
Yes, indeed.
Can I move on from that, please, and ask you some questions about the nature of the meetings in the safe houses that you attended whilst you were in the back office, but also then on through your deployment?
Yes.
So in your witness statement, I think you say, paragraph 22, that you went to all of the safe house meetings and you listened to people talking about their work and challenges before you were deployed. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I ask you about the structure of the meetings that you attended, thinking first of all to the time that you were in the back office, and then you can tell us if it ever changed. Was it expected, as far as you knew at that stage, that all of the deployed officers would attend those meetings if they could?
Yes.
And do you recall seeing a sizable group at every meeting that you went to, so people were making the effort to attend?
Yes.
Was there a set pattern to what happened at the safe house?
Yes.
And I think in your witness statement you refer to a sort of parish news from the managers.
Yes.
When you say parish news, do you mean news from special branch, or do you mean news about the SDS, or possibly both?
Possibly both. Whatever sort of was going to grab people's attention that the bosses thought we needed to know about. That would be how we kicked the meeting off.
But might it include things about other SDS officers, or was it more to do with regulations, guidance? Can you give us a flavour?
Yeah. So it would. So the meetings were quite. Not everyone wanted to be there, but there was a recognition they needed to be. So attention spans, were sometimes limited. So it would. The parish briefing would need to be relevant with news of interest. So either thanks for what we've done, or an interesting event, or some big events coming up that we need to be sort of working towards. That was 5 minutes worth. Then the rest of the meeting was going around the room with each officer giving the headlines of what they'd been doing since we last met, and the headlines of what everyone needed to know coming up in the immediate future. And that was accompanied by each officer had their sort of, if you like, attaché case brought out by me, the T-boy, where they'd have taskings, administrative matters to deal with, which they would deal with in the meeting room, back in those bags. I'd scoop them up in a suitcase. We'd go back, put them in the car, back to the office.
All right, thank you. Can I just explore a couple of points on that a little more? When you say each officer gave headlines of what they were doing, can you explain, was that in terms of what events they were attending? Was that the sort of thing?
Yeah, so it could be key events that we'd heard about the week before. So how did that event go? What happened? It could be about key individuals. And more importantly, it was about what's coming up that these officers would either have knowledge of and or be part of.
And was that shared, so obviously in the meeting, I won't ask you for detail, but in the meeting, if there would have been officers who were deployed into different fields, so not everybody was in animal rights, within an animal rights group, were they? Does that mean that you were hearing about deployments not just in the animal rights field, but also in the other fields into which SDS officers were deployed?
Yeah, and that was in part, the reason for these meetings, to share, hear about the challenges, bit of collective problem solving, bit of sort of mentoring, collective welfare, but also just better understanding of what we were all doing across the remit of the whole of the SDS. And then, where stuff needed to take place in private with the bosses, there'd be one-to-ones as part of those twice weekly gatherings.
When you say problem solving, do you mean that officers would come with and explain challenges that they were having in their deployment sometimes and seek guidance from others?
Yeah. Some of that would be an open court around the fireplace. Some of it would be between sort of gatherings between officers that sort of gravitated towards each other in smaller circles.
Right, so it doesn't follow that if, for example, you raised a particular difficulty, every other undercover officer would necessarily have been party to that. You might have shared it just with a small number.
There would be both those scenarios would play out. So the officer would decide what they wanted to share in general and what they needed to talk specifically to specific people about.
And sometimes that would take place in a one-to-one with the managers, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, so often the reason for that would be where there were sort of, if you like, opposing groups being represented that were likely to sort of clash, and the officers within those fields would need to discuss with the management, without others being in the room, the more sort of sensitive and pertinent to their operations detail.
Did you have one-to-ones with managers in the side rooms?
I did once deployed, yes.
And how frequently do you estimate that happened?
Well, not that often. I didn't often see personally the need for it. I was quite happy to talk, openly to the degree that anyone was interested beyond their own operations.
Are you able to say when you did avail yourself of a one-to-one meeting, about what sort of topic did you seek to speak to management one-on-one?
So it would be, and quite often once I was out in the field, it wouldn't be to wait for that meeting. It would be to arrange probably a one-to-one outside of that sort of more general setting. But anyway, in terms of what it would be about, it could be about low-level criminality. It could be reporting on individuals in which there was a potential threat to the target of a demonstration. We just needed to risk assess the degree to which that person needed to be informed. It was normally something specific as to how we were going to handle the intelligence dissemination related to me being privy to it, but not others.
And when you referred to low-level criminality, did you mean to refer to whether or not you should involve yourself in low-level criminality?
So it was either rarely in response to some low-level criminality that I'd been present at, and I think we'll come on to it, a court appearance, and the circumstances under which I'd been asked to be a witness because I was at the same event. So those sorts of things would be separate meetings, one-to-one, not necessarily wait for one of the 2 weekly meetings.
Why would you seek out a one-to-one if you had been present at an event at which there was low-level criminality? That was a pretty regular occurrence for you, wasn't it?
It wasn't a regular occurrence, no.
For you to have been present when low-level criminality occurred?
Yeah, that wasn't a regular occurrence for me.
It was rare?
It was rare, yeah.
And
yeah.
Are you saying that you spoke to your managers after the event when you had been present?
Yes, or on rare occasions, this is a possibility of what's going to happen at this event because of the nature of the individuals there and their propensity for sort of spontaneous action.
I just want to focus on your evidence earlier that you might have had a one-to-one if you had been present at an event where low-level criminality had taken place. Why would that necessitate a one-to-one or make it desirable?
Well, it might not. It might easily be able to wait. I was just giving that as an example. Most of the office, sort of prided itself as in offering, if you like, a level of sort of one-to-one engagement where you could talk through. And this was one's only means of talking to anyone about anything. Was that trusted environment of the office bosses with what you were doing out there and what you were surrounded by, what was going on.
But what I'm trying to understand, HM1, is why, if you'd been present at an event with low-level criminality, wouldn't you just write that down and put it in an intelligence report?
Well, I did that as well. I did that. Yeah, I mean, maybe I've used the wrong example. I mean, I'm making it sound far more formal and dramatic than it was. I mean, it was just the one-to-one engagement was a part of what the office enjoyed doing because it was a better quality conversation where they could devote more time to the complexity of your operations.
When at the Safe House meetings people had one-to-ones, was it obvious to the rest of the group in terms of the layout of the Safe House? Was it obvious that, X is going off to have a one-to-one with the managers?
Yeah, no, these were tiny sort of 2-bedroom places, yeah.
All right, just going back, please, to the Safe House meetings in general and their structure. You say in your witness statement that they would last all of the afternoon. Did they end up in the pub, and if so, how frequently?
So the pub was an option. Most people actually wanted to just, leave and get back to what they were doing. But there was always the option if people wanted it for a social sort of continuation of the discussion.
And are you able to give any idea of how many officers might ordinarily attend the pub after a meeting? Would it be the majority, the minority?
It was definitely the minority. The core constituents really were, when I was in the back office, me as the T-boy was there whether I liked it or not.
Yep. Please be careful with names or any descriptors based on an area of deployment before you continue.
Sure, thank you. And the office staff. But it was a minority on a regular basis who would avail themselves of the pub option.
So by office staff, do you mean the detective sergeants from the back office?
The detective sergeants, the detective inspector, and the detective chief inspector.
All right. So they would commonly attend the pub after the meeting.
Yeah.
What sort of proportion of the undercover officers, in your experience, would ordinarily go to the pub?
So in my time, I was only a regular pub goer in that setting when I was in the back office. I don't know, 2 or 3, but quite often for not that long either.
What was the atmosphere like when you did go to the pub? For example, how much alcohol was being drunk?
Well, it didn't last that long quite often, so not that much. It was a convivial setting. People felt safe there. It was a nice continuation, end of day, of the meeting for those that wanted it. But I say most people were keen just to get back to their sort of cover existences. And many people didn't come at all.
And when you say not much was drunk, because people have different ideas of what a lot and not a lot of alcohol is, could you give us an idea in terms of pints of beer, how much not much would be?
Well, I don't remember anything from my recollection more than 2 pints, and very often sort of less than that even.
Were the 2 or when you say 2 or 3, typically 2 or 3 undercover officers might go? Was it always the same characters going along, or did it vary?
No, it did vary. Yeah.
Just going back to the meetings themselves, and the nature of what was discussed. You mentioned before, when you were answering my questions, that perhaps not everybody seemed to want to be at the meetings, although they accepted the need for being there. In your witness statement, you said at paragraph 86 that everyone was genuinely interested to hear what others had to say. Do you remember saying that in your witness statement?
Yes, I do.
Well, and is that the impression that you got?
Yeah, that is the general impression. That is a general impression, yeah.
So I note the time. I'm not going to be able to finish this section within a few minutes, so I wonder whether we should take the lunch break now, and I'll come back to it at 2.
So be it. We'll rise now and resume at 2.